Good morning, happy Halloween, and welcome to the virtual Ossining Public Library. We're going to give people a couple of minutes to log on to Facebook Live, so give us just a sec.
And Martha, you're going to speak about Sparta, correct?
Well, Jug Tavern.
Jug Tavern and the community, but then you're going to talk about the community.
With Dana later.
Okay.
With Garrison.
Okay? Remember, this is, the mind can only absorb what the butt can endure.
I've got 3 people watching already.
So,
4 now.
Wrap it up? Yeah, I guess. Or me.
I got 5 on there. You got it? All right, I got 7. I think we can go ahead. I think you can go ahead. Yep.
Good morning, and happy Halloween, and welcome to the virtual Ossining Public Library. We're so glad you're joining us on Facebook Live for a Halloween morning at Sparta Cemetery. I'm Diana Lennon, Head of Adult Services at the library. I want to let you know that we're socially distancing here and wearing our masks when we need to be near each other. Our invited experts will give you a tour of the cemetery and a lot of information. Please post any questions in the chat box and be sure to comment, and we hope you like what they say. We will post a video later on our website, ossininglibrary.org, under Digital Library, and then on our LibGuide called Ossining Local History. Be sure to check it out for interesting facts, books, pictures of historical sites in our area, and links to the websites of all the people who will speak today. We'll be here for about an hour, and we are hoping to do future events at other area locations, so be sure to check out our calendar and our website. Sign up for our emails, again, at ossininglibrary.org. And here now are our expert speakers who will introduce themselves. Dana?
Hi, my name is Dana White. I am the former Ossining Village historian. I am here to introduce you to some of the experts who are going to lead us on our tour today. I am going to start with Joyce Cole, our new village historian.
Good morning, I'm Joyce Cole. I'm the new village historian, as Dana said. I am a lifelong resident of Ossining, and I actually love coming to cemeteries because they are an invaluable resource for researchers, and it's just going to be a pleasure to take you through Sparta this morning. Thank you.
Okay, so next we have Martha Masidi. Martha was town historian for, she can tell you what dates that was, and she's an expert research librarian.
Hi, I'm Martha Masidi. I'm former town historian. I was town historian from 2010 to 2017. I'm on the board of the Jug Tavern of Sparta. The Jug Tavern is a building at the intersection of Rockledge Avenue and Revolutionary Road. The Jug Tavern of Sparta is an organization that has 2 primary purposes. One is to preserve and maintain the historic building, and the other is to preserve and retell its stories, and also the stories of the Sparta Historic District. We're on pause right now with our programming, but last year, in addition to monthly walking tours, we've had 2 lectures on Hudson River history. We had 2 concerts on old-time music related to Hudson River history. We partnered with the Ossining Arts Council for an exhibit of works by Ossining artists, and we co-sponsored a Sparta Cemetery tour, walking tour, with the Ossining Historic Cemeteries Conservancy. Next year, we hope to welcome you back for our monthly walking
and Regina Albinus.
Good morning. We are on the board of the Ossining Historic Cemeteries Conservancy, and our mission is the restoration and the preservation of Ossining's historic cemeteries, which includes this cemetery, Sparta, and the historic sections of Dale Cemetery. And to that end, in better times, we gathered monthly to come to the cemeteries and actually clean and, if we can, reset some of the gravestones that have shifted and fallen. And our goal is to make sure that the history, the beauty, the culture of these cemeteries is there for us and for all those that follow in Ossining. So, thank you.
Thank you. And finally, well, not last, but Robert Stava is on the board of the Ossining Historical Society Museum.
Hi, my name is Robert Stava. As Dan has mentioned, I'm a trustee on the Ossining Historical Society, and our mission really is here to help preserve and maintain the history of the town and village of Ossining. We're a group of like-minded volunteers that are just very passionate about it, and for those of you who are part of our events, and you'll realize that we're all we have a very colorful and interesting history around here, and hope you enjoy today. I'm also a local writer, deals with supernatural, folklore, and historical fiction in the area, so I've done a lot of research on that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Last but never least, Scott Craven, Ossining Town Historian, and the mastermind.
Good morning, and welcome to Sparta Cemetery on this Halloween morning. It's actually pretty beautiful. The last couple of days have been crummy, but this morning's been fantastic. My name's Scott Craven. I'm the current town of Ossining historian, and I currently am a library assistant at the Ossining Public Library for about 3 years now. A lot of people know me from the community. I was a police officer here for almost 32 years, so I've been involved with this for a long time. We've done these kind of tours here before. This is a fascinating place, but we're going to try this different today because of ongoing events. And we're hoping that if we can actually pull this off, if Lewis here doesn't fail us with his technology, that we can do more of these. And quite frankly, we were talking about it before, logistically, this is easy for us. No buses, no parking, no crowds, no concern about weather. So hopefully, if we could pull this off, we'll do more in the future. What we're going to do at first is, Joyce Cole is going to talk a little bit about where the cemetery is today in Ossining. And then Dana and Martha are going to talk a little about Sparta Cemetery itself. And then we're going to walk through the cemetery, looking at different headstones and talking about them, and finishing over at the famous Leatherman. Hopefully, this will be an hour, tops, and then we'll be on our way. If you want to ask questions, please feel free to during the course of this, and we'll answer any that we can. So thanks for coming. Here's Joyce.
Good morning again. So we are at Sparta Cemetery, located at maybe 200 yards from Revolutionary Road, from Route 9 and Revolutionary Road. But please do not stop on Route 9 to come here. Come down Revolutionary Road to park on, kind of looks like the shoulder. You'll see the parking here. It is a beautiful place. It's our oldest cemetery, historic cemetery. It is the resting place for our earliest families and early settlers that really are the key to who we are as a community. We have here buried 115 veterans from the Revolutionary War to World War II. You are going to really enjoy what you see here today. Thank you.
And I guess Dana and Martha will be speaking about Sparta's community, or this part of the community today.
Hi, so the thing that people may not realize about Sparta Cemetery is that it was the community burying ground for probably the oldest settlement around here, right?
Right, that's correct.
And basically when the great European immigration began here to the New World in the 18th century, this was a place that people settled. They settled a hamlet called Sparta. They named it For some reason, they think they were influenced by the Greeks, but Sparta's not an uncommon name. Now, there's actually Sparta upstate, there's Spartas all over the country, right?
Yes.
So, you know, the people, the earliest settlers here, it was a small community, and of course, what did they want? They wanted to create a church. It was mostly English immigrants, but there's also some French. They built a church right on that hill. Right. What happened to it? But it didn't last, right?
Well, it was damaged in the Revolutionary War. It continued as a church here until about 1799, when it moved into Sing Sing, and it was on the site of the current Trinity Episcopal Church, and it was the Presbyterian Church.
But when basically the
Sing Sing the
immigrants
village,
here,
not the prison.
Sing Sing the village, not the prison.
remember, Ossining was called Sing Sing until 1901.
And it's the oldest congregation for the reason that it started here and moved into Ossining.
But so the immigrants were tenant farmers for the King of England, basically. And they worked the land. And then when the revolution began, many of them went and fought the king, and afterwards were able to buy the land that they had been working as tenant farmers. And they created a community. I mean, there's not a lot of people. It was a very small place. And you can take a walking tour of the community, just mostly that way. And you'll see it's very old. And so the people buried here are, you know, the guy who, the tax collector and the keeper of the poor, and the people who kind of made the hamlet work on a day-to-day basis. And there's about 36 Revolutionary War veterans.
That's about right, yeah.
And there are also Civil War veterans, and there are World War I veterans. So I think about half of the people buried here are veterans of military service, which maybe a third, a lot. And that's actually pretty unusual. Now, when Dale Cemetery opened in 1852, down on the other end of town, it became competition for the cemetery, right? And Dale was, in fact, several people were dug up out of Sparta and reburied in Dale. So the cemetery is closed now. I don't think they're accepting any new residents. No, is that not true?
That is true.
That is true.
They are not.
Okay. But it remains one of the oldest burying grounds in Westchester County, and in fact, the church, which was destroyed, which was damaged during the Revolution. It eventually became a tavern, because you know that's what you do with old churches, right? And and then eventually it was demolished. So it did stand right on top of that hill, but the congregation still exists, and they're the first Presbyterian up the road.
Alrighty, we're going to start talking about different gravestones and places right here. We'll do a little bit of overview about cemeteries and materials and things like that. First of all, cemetery and graveyard, although they're used interchangeably, are two different things. When this was originally put here in the 18th century, it was a graveyard because it was attached to a church. Today it's a cemetery, which isn't attached to a singular church. There's a famous rural cemetery, Dale Cemetery, just north of here. It comes here in the middle of the 19th century, but originally this is a graveyard. Now it's a cemetery. A couple of things about this. When I was in second grade at Brookside School, and Mrs. Shalene brought us here, we did grave rubbing. You don't do grave rubbing anymore. People frown on that. They damage the gravestones, so as cool as they were when we were kids, we don't do them anymore. But a couple things to remember. If you are going to go and look at gravestones, one of the things I like to bring is a small flashlight. You can use your iPhone light as well. What it allows you to do is highlight some of the things that would otherwise be impossible to see. So if you bring a small flashlight or you use your phone light, it'll allow you to look at these stones in a better way. One of the reasons I need it this morning is because these old gravestones, typically back then, these old gravestones were aligned on a north-south axis, facing east. If we look at the Ledoux family here, when we look at their separate markers, understand that this person is buried here, not here. So this person was on the other side, facing east, because the day of judgment, the crack-a-doodle will come with the dawn from the east. So people wanted to be prepared. So they were buried on their backs, facing east. Also understand that these look like, almost like headboards on a bed. That's because that's what they are. They are seemingly lying in a bed, waiting for Judgment Day. Often in these old cemeteries, in addition to a headstone, you'll see a footstone as well, which really makes it look like a bed. So that's why they're oriented in this manner, and that's why when you come to an old graveyard in the morning, you need to bring a flashlight because there'll be no sun on its face. Another good example around here is all the building materials that are used locally in the valley are present right in this one spot. For openers, these oldest gravestones are red sandstone. Sometimes they're called brownstone, as in houses in Brooklyn. They are sandstone with iron oxide in them. We have iron here in the valley, so they're all turned red just like our bricks. The nice thing about them is they're really soft and they can be carved really well. The bad thing about them is when these rocks are deposited down like the layers of a cake, to carve them, they bring them up like this and carve on the face. But the bedding planes, the cracks where they were laid down, lie like this. The length of the stone. And unfortunately, these marks here are chisel marks. Those are chisel marks of just getting the stone out. But when they lay these bedding planes being up and down like this, if water gets into these cracks, it expands in the winter and it can crack the whole face off. Let's go take a look at one of those right now. Okay. So sadly, what happens is, it looks great, and then one winter, water gets into one of these bedding planes, expands, and cracks the face of the marker off. Jane and her group does restoration of things like this, and she's well aware of the issues with all these different materials. And it's sad because these are some of our oldest headstones, and they are, and they look great right until the last minute. Then you come here one morning, and they're a pile in front of you. So Jane has, in the past, had people come in and restore them. So what they do is, her group, if they find one like this, they'll keep all the pieces, and there is somebody that can put it back together again. If you look at some of the older mile markers on Route 9, they're also red sandstone. What some of them have done there in the olden days is they've covered the top with lead, like the one in Peekskill. And the reason they cover it with lead is it prevents the water from getting down into these bedding planes, then cracking the face off. So as much as these are beautiful, easily carved, the bad downside of it is they can flake away. Another material that's here is marble. This is Sing Sing marble. Dana?
Yes.
Sing Sing marble, correct?
Yes.
So this is Sing Sing marble. This is the reason the prison's here, because this was the stone that they quarried. This is actually dolomitic marble. So what that means is, at one point it was dolomitic limestone, and then it got metamorphosed, heat and pressure and things like that, and it turns into marble and it easily carved. The problem is, when limestone is deposited, it's deposited as shells, as calcite, and that means that it can melt with acid. So rain is slightly acidic, and air pollution rain is very acidic. So what happens is it rains on these marble headstones. Over time, they appear to melt. And over time, you can lose the face. So if you come over here, what Jane's group has done is they're able to clean them. So here's what they look like over time when they've been weathered. And here's one that Jane's group has done that looks fantastic.
If I could just interject. What's interesting to us is the sandstone is, as we said, is beautiful to the very last day. The carvings remain, but the marble over time will flatten and wear away, and pretty soon you can't even read it, even with the cleanings that we do. And the cleaning process is very, very gentle. We use very soft brushes. We scrape away any moss, and we really clean it just softly with water and a special biochemical that doesn't, there's no acid, it's not caustic, it won't take it away. But our group, among the things we do, besides cleaning it and trying to restore these, is recording what each gravestone says, including their lengthy epitaphs on some of them, that someday, if this wears flat, we have it. We have it written down, who was here, what they said. It's important for history, and there's a lot of beautiful poetry in it too.
Yes, there is.
And I don't know if there's time to show them the sandstone markers that were restored.
We'll see. If we have time again, we'll take a look at it for sure.
Okay, because that requires, our group doesn't do that. That requires fundraising for experts who can come in and restore these sandstone markers. Or, as you can see, they're just lost forever. So it's a very important work, we feel. Thanks.
The most modern material we see here is granite. This is also found in the valley. There's a great old granite quarry up on the Yorktown-Petersville line. I don't know where this comes from. Most commercial granite these days comes from Vermont. This marble comes here from Ossining, and the sandstone probably comes from over on top of the Palisades Sill, directly across the river. Most of the brownstone in New York City comes from the Connecticut River Valley. I think this is more local. But this is granite, highly polished, typical of a modern headstone. The things you're not going to find here, you're not going to find slate, which is common in Puritan cemeteries up in New England. You're not going to find zinc, which they call white bronze, which I think you have some in Dale Cemetery.
Yes, we do. Zinkers, they're called.
You're not going to find field stones, which are the original stones. There were probably here some at one point, where some poor farmer lost somebody. He just tipped the stone up and carved what he could. There are a couple around the valley, including the old Dutch burial ground, but I don't believe there are any here today.
No, there is one hand-carved headstone.
Okay.
But that's it. It's not a field stone.
Okay. This is also a good place to look at the start of the symbology. What you see here a lot, and these old ones, are soul effigies. Pictures of angels with wings, crowned, ascending into heaven. Here's another example. In the Puritan ones, which are older, they're usually death's heads. They're a pretty grim crew. But these folks were, I guess, a little more positive and enlightened, and the soul effigies are pretty common. They're beautiful. And if you know the carvers, you could tell by the style who carved it. This might have been Solomon Brewer because of the eyes. This might have been a man named Zuricher because of the cheeks. So people were into that. Could tell the carvers apart by the style they had. And here's my favorite. This is a headstone where the mother is plucking her own breast for blood to feed her children. This is the Ledoux family. That's the only place I know I've ever seen this symbol. It's pretty cool. The Ledoux family are famous. They were actually probably originally French Huguenots. They came over, they were Calvinist Protestants in France. They came over, they were persecuted first to England, then over here. They settled mostly in New Rochelle and Newport here in the valley. And they probably changed the name to Ledoux, or at least the spelling. This is famous because it's the oldest in the plot. And this empty section here was a headstone with a hole in it that purportedly had been fired by the HMS Vulture during the American Revolution after they were forced down river after not being able to pick up Andre and when he was meeting with Benedict Arnold. I'm old enough to have seen this. We have the pieces of it at the Ossining Historical Society. Maybe someday we'll put it back together.
It's a lot of little pieces.
It's a lot of little pieces. Whether it actually happened, I don't know.
What we could do, well, you know, everybody wanted some sort of American Revolutionary War yarn in their family. Everybody wanted to be a part of that great conflict, right? But I want to know, Scott, how come, here's a plaque that was put up, like, I think in the 30s by the Daughters of the American Revolution. And it says, this stone was pierced by a cannon shot fired from the British sloop of war Vulture, commanded by Lieutenant Sutherland, September 1780. Now you'll see, Lieutenant, there seems to be a patch there, Lieutenant Sutherland, right? That's because it originally had the wrong commander of the Vulture on there. They said it was Commander Kemmys. Now Kemmy, the name you remember, you know, from Kemmy's Cove, and the Kemmy family is buried here. They were also early settlers, but they didn't have the internet back then, and they couldn't double check. And a lot of stuff was orally transferred from one person to another through story. So if there was a mistake, it just kept getting repeated, and somehow they thought it was a Kemmy. Now the Kemmys weren't even here yet, I don't think. I'm not sure. So they found out it was Lieutenant Sutherland.
Diana?
Scott and Dana, Connie has a question. Why is memory spelled memory with 2 M's on those headstones?
Oh, where?
It is. That isn't uncommon to see things like that, especially the older sandstone ones. You see a lot of abbreviations, a lot of different spellings, a lot of words that we don't use today.
I also want to mention there are some older gravestones here where they say, here lies the body, and lies is spelled L-Y-E-S. It may have been an acceptable spelling of the word at the time. But yes, you'll even see gravestones that have caroted in something. So it's not uncommon in the very, very old ones to see different spellings. It just is what they used at the time.
We're going to go over and talk to Joyce now about the Arnold family plot right over here.
Good morning again. So now I am at the resting place of Arnold Hunt and his wife Phoebe. Arnold was born in Tarrytown actually in 1723. He died in 1792, as you can see on the stone. It says he lived 69 years. If you are a researcher and trying to find out how to determine someone's age or a date, a cemetery is a good place to go because you check on their stone to kind of determine what the date of birth is. And usually if you look, they're surrounded by family members, so it helps give you a nice blueprint on the family. So why is Arnold Hunt important? Because this was amongst his land when he was a tenant farmer. He was renting from Colonel Frederick Phillips. It was 283, I think, acres of land that he was renting as a tenant farmer. And he was a Revolutionary War patriot for Colonel Hammond's New York militia. So what's really interesting is when New York State confiscated the land from Phillips because he was a loyalist, Arnold purchased his land that he had, but this land was exempt from the purchase for the church and the cemetery. What also is interesting about him, interesting story, the British tried to take money from him. He was known to have money, and they tried to hang him unsuccessfully, tried to find this money from his own apple tree. And where was the money? Buried in a box right at the apple tree. What is really interesting when I researched into Arnold's life, the other people here are connected to him, besides his kids, is I found another man that was buried. His neighbor was also in the same militia that he was in, and another gentleman, Thomas Bishop, was actually the executor of his will. So you will find a lot about these people when you take the information from their stone and maybe do a research at the library into their wills and their life. And I was able to find how much he got for being in the Revolutionary War. So it's very interesting when you start to dig deeper into the lives of the families. So I just wanted to add, on December 6, 1785 is when he purchased the land from the Commissioner of Forfeiture.
We're going to walk over towards the Revolutionary Road now. And we're going to look at the Donahue child, Joyce.
I thought it was you.
No, I'm not. Revolutionary Road was the Albany Post Road at the time. So although Route 9's behind us now, when this cemetery was here during the American Revolution, that was the post road right over here. So this would have been the original front of the graveyard, and when you're over on Route 9, it's actually the back of the graveyard. This was the quietest place in Austin until this morning. Since we've had lawnmowers, helicopters, construction materials, and cars.
So where we're at now is the resting place of Violet Donahue. She was born in 1890 and she passed in 1892. She was 2 years old at the time of her death. She died from whooping cough and pneumonia. She was the first child to her parents, William Donahue of Irish descent and Nellie Bird Donahue of English descent. What's really just beautiful about her resting place is that she was the first child, so every child after her was her younger sibling. The youngest sibling, Henry, who went by Harry, was a famous sculptor of religious sculptures. And he came back in 1940 and he paid reverence to his sister and memorialized her with this marble baby. And what's really beautiful is she is the only one, they call her the marble baby, because she's the only one that has a statue in this cemetery to kind of pay reverence to her life. So she was 2 years old when she passed. And when digging in her life, she never made it into a census document because she was too young. The 1890 census that when she was born that she would have ended up in was burned in a fire, so we don't have access to it. So the only time we actually see little Violet is in the 1900 and 1910 U.S. federal census when mothers had to put down how many kids they had and how many were living. So each time she had to remember Violet by saying that she was down one child because it had passed away. So little Violet had lived on in that family, evidently, through her life when her brother thought enough to make a statue to memorialize her short life, but a memorable life. Thank you.
Hi, Lieutenant Commander Albert Rivers Genet. If that name sounds familiar, he is the great-grandson of Citizen Genet. Citizen Genet is a French diplomat that comes over here in 1793, 1792. The French Revolution is going on. He comes over in an attempt to get America to side with the French. Hamilton and Washington want to maintain a strict position of neutrality. They tell him he's got to leave. He doesn't. He attempts to solicit privateers, and they get pretty mad at him. And while he's over in the United States, there's a change of hands in France, and they get a new set of revolutionaries who are a little more draconian than his group. They recall him, and it becomes obvious to him he goes back to France, they're going to behead him. So he goes to the very politicians, Alexander Hamilton, who he's been butting heads with. He asks for what's essentially political asylum, and he gets it. And he moves to East Greenbush, New York, and his family stays here in the valley until his death. His great-grandson, his famous great-grandson is Edmund Genet. He is born in Ossining. He is Albert's brother. He is in the United States Navy in 1915, deserts, goes over to France, joins the French Foreign Legion, fights with the French Foreign Legion in several battles, joins the Lafayette Escadrille. America declares war, and he's killed the next day. So he becomes the first American casualty in World War I. His brother is in the Navy during World War I and lives until only 1922. I don't know why he died, but I know he died in Saranac Lake, so I think it's fair to assume he died of something called tuberculosis, which they called consumption back then. That's where people were sent. There was a doctor up there named Trudeau who believed that fresh air helped cure tuberculosis. He did a lot of work on it up there. And I assume that's what happened to Lieutenant Commander Genet. And that's why he passed away up in Syria. It's a pretty incredible story, and it stretches all the way back to 1792. The next one we're going to is Captain Brady. Captain Brady is my favorite story in this whole thing. A lot of people know Captain Brady because that's his little teeny brown house next to the Scarborough Manor entrance, the captain's house. That's where he lived.
Brady. We're gonna tuck in here for a while. This story's a little long. So Captain Brady, Lewis Brady, was born in Kent County, Maryland in 1773, and he died in 1881. So what's important about him, or what's interesting about him, is he is was a former slave. His father was a slave of George Washington. His mother was also enslaved on a nearby plantation. So what's very cool about this man's life, he was the oldest person buried here. He died at 108 years old, and his journey here was amazing. So I'm just going to take you on a little trip. His father was set free by George Washington. In his will, George Washington wanted to set all his slaves free. And then they were to be free upon the death of his wife, Martha. However, when he died, Martha feared for her life as the slaves were waiting to be free upon her death. So she set them free early. In that early emancipation of the slaves, Lewis's father was set free. However, Lewis did not live on the plantation that his father lived on. He was on a nearby one with Colonel Zabriskie. His mother was able to buy her freedom, but was not able to buy the freedom of her children. So Lewis remained enslaved. And when I think it was the War of 1812, Zabriskie was a colonel. He was fighting alongside, well, he didn't fight alongside him. He was his body servant, which means he took care of all of the needs of Zabriskie. He was in battle. I'm sure he had to fight with them, but he got no credit for being in the war. Shortly after the war, Zabriskie died, and then ownership of Lewis Brady went to Zabriskie's niece. The niece remarried, she married, and her husband was a grist mill owner. So Lewis had to work in the grist mill. Well, the owner started to become heavy in drinking, and he started to lose his land. Lewis was told he had a tavern, his old master, and in the tavern was a house that they sold the slaves in, this auction house. And they told Lewis that he was going on the auction block. He went in for inspection and he passed out. They told him to go home. He was coming back to be sold. But when he went out, he went and found someone that told him how to escape. They told him to run straight for New York. So he headed out the next day, never turned back, left. And he started out in the home of a Quaker in Pennsylvania. He made his way to New Jersey, and when he got close to New York, he tried to get on a ferry to Long Island. They told him they had too many runaway slaves. They turned him away. He tried to find another way in, and he had a very hard time. So he took up working, and there was a lot of people along the way that allowed him to work for them. And Lewis was frugal. He saved that money. So when he eventually ended up here, he was able to buy his own sloop, very close, and bought his sloop, and he had an oyster and fish clam business, and that's what he worked the entire time he was here. I found a very interesting article about him that described what he looked like. So we didn't have photography or any paintings of him. So getting an article that gives you a visual of what this man looked like is amazing. It described him as a tall man, head full of white hair, slightly rounded shoulders, and walked with a slight limp because he had rheumatism in one ankle. However, he was quite a character because he told the interviewer that if it wasn't for that rheumatism in that ankle, that he could run circles around him, and at that time he was 107 years old. So they also described him as being an intelligent-looking Negro. They noted him as being scrupulously fair and honest. He was respected and revered by this community, and he apparently loved to have company. When they were interviewing him, he was in the garden hoeing beans. So this man was in 107 years old, still working, and we tried to stop working at about 65. His life and his legacy, actually, I don't know if you know this, but his name, they called him Captain Brady. They also called him Uncle Lou. They referred to him as the Old Oysterman, but none of those things were his name. His actual name was Noah Brady. But because of a disagreement with one of the masters that he had, he started to go by Lewis, and that's what his wills and everything else said about him. But what is great about this is he shows up in the census documents in 1860, and if you know anything about that, if you were in an 1860 census and you were black, it meant you were free. Lewis Brady was free at that point, and he went on to have a few children. And what was very beautiful and amazing for that time period is that he created generational wealth. And going through his will, we were able to see he was leaving property to his kids. His kids would go on to leave property to their kids, and they would, even in their will, leave money to the community. They left money to start Bethlehem Church. They left money to the Ossining Hospital. So how was I able to find all that out? Just by the resources we have right here in Ossining. You go to the Ossining Library, you can take advantage of the Ancestry.com account, use the reference librarians and learn about census documents and accessing wills and newspapers, and you can start to draw a picture of these people and the lives and how they connect with our community and form who we are in our collective history. Thank you.
Thomas came over from England with his wife. He ran a house of entertainment, which is not what you think. It was actually a tavern. They called them houses of entertainment because what did you really have to do back then for entertainment? Not a whole lot. No Game Boys, no PlayStations, no TVs. You sang songs, you drank, you talked, you told stories, you played music, and you hung out at the house of entertainment. And that's how you had fun. So he opened that in 1811. He also had a store in Sparta, which was where he sold medicines. He was trustee of the first schoolhouse. Now he is buried in one of these. Take my word for it. Now he and his wife had 3 children. And the thing that's amazing about their children is that they were all very talented and successful artists of the period. Now, because they didn't have photography, artists were very important because they illustrated what happened, right? You couldn't take a picture of it, but you could draw a picture of it. Now, they were fine artists. In fact, Probably the best known was Alfred. Alfred was buried right here. I don't know what happened to his no, I'm sorry, that's Frederick. Frederick is buried here. He was known in the 1830s for painting little tiny miniature portraits. It was quite the fad back in the early 19th century. Little tiny portraits, and he showed widely, and his work is at the New York City of the Museum of the City of New York. He helped to found the National Academy of Design. Now they had a younger brother, Alfred. He's buried in Washington, D.C., and he painted, he traveled with expeditions and drew what they found. So remember, back in the early 19th century, there was still a whole lot of world left to discover. So he would go out with these expeditions as their artist and illustrator so that he could document visually what they found. And he went to islands in the South Pacific, and he was the first one to actually draw Mount Shasta. Unfortunately, all these travels left him in ill health, and he died fairly young. Now, Frederick became pretty famous, but he also passed away young, and he died at the house of his sister, Harriet. Harriet lived on Liberty Street, and the house is still there. Harriet was probably the best artist of them all. She did a lot of landscapes. She too exhibited at the National Museum of Design, or the National Academy of Design, which was unusual for a woman at the time. Now, of course, being a woman, it meant she got less attention than her brothers. And I have personally never seen, Martha, have you ever seen one of her works?
I have not.
That's the problem. Her works have disappeared, but she was extremely skilled. She was married to Thomas Carmichael. Now, he was an engineer, and in fact, he worked on the Croton Aqueduct. Now, they lived together on Liberty Street, and then he decided he was going to buy land out west, and he dragged her out there. He died there. They came back, and she continued to live on Liberty Street, and she's one of the women buried in this cemetery who has a kind of great unknown stories.
Okay, we go over to Leatherman, last but not least. The Leatherman is probably the most famous person interred here in the cemetery. He is the object of a Eddie Vedder song in popular culture. He's the reason most people know of this cemetery. And it's his little plaque up here that you can kind of see from right now. You know, your best story on the other. Dane's going to talk about him. I'm going to answer any questions you have. Yeah, I think it's great.
So let's start here. The plaque from the Pomeroy Foundation, which funds historical plaques all around New York State. So here's one for the Leatherman. I'm going to read an article I wrote years ago for the Bicentennial Journal about the Leatherman. This is his stone. We're going to explain how this all came to be and why there's coins on top. Ready? A century and a half ago, when our village was called Sing Sing, one of the 19th century's most peculiar characters was rambling into legend. No one knew who he was, where he came from, or why he spent more than 30 years walking the back roads of New York and Connecticut, communicating primarily through grunts and hand gestures. But this mysterious, eccentric pedestrian, as the New York Times called him, became the subject of intense fascination, so much so that his death in 1889 made the front page of the New York City papers. In ways, the Leatherman was the American equivalent of another late 19th century curiosity, England's Elephant Man, eccentric, pitied, and misunderstood. What was most remarkable about the Leatherman, aside from his heavy, handmade leather suit and wooden-soled shoes, was the systematic nature of his ramblings. For many years, he traveled the same 365-mile route, always on foot. After being harassed by hooligans who tried to force-feed him a bottle of whiskey, the Leatherman avoided densely populated areas. He walked clockwise along the same roads, through the same villages, stopping at the same homes for food and sleeping in the same caves he found along the way. Each loop took 34 days to complete, but his schedule was so precise he arrived within 30 minutes of the last time he'd been here that the villagers could set their watches by his impending arrival. How the Leatherman, who did not own a timepiece, kept to such a rigid schedule only added to the aura of mystery and fascination surrounding him. Along the way, the Leatherman became a sort of one-man sideshow. Newspapers reported on his comings and goings. Children ran out to see him, both fascinated and repelled. He was photographed numerous times, and Victorian-era writers penned long, elaborate fictions about his life. A mythology grew up around him. He was said to be a Frenchman who had suffered a terrible tragedy and that his wanderings were his penance. He had been spurned by a beautiful woman in France and fled the country. He had been a wealthy businessman who lost the family fortune and went insane. The truth is, all anyone knew for sure was that he was harmless. After the Great Blizzard of 1888, the Leatherman's health began to deteriorate, and the public became so concerned for his welfare that the Connecticut Humane Society arrested him and put him in a hospital, though he managed to escape and continue his ramblings even as cancer ate away at his jaw. One of the Leatherman's caves in Westchester County was on the Mount Pleasant property of a farmer named George Dell, and another was on the Ryder farm. In March of 1889, a carpenter agreed to satisfy his wife's desire to see the Leatherman's cave. Upon arriving, they found the Leatherman himself, recently dead. The body was taken to the village of Sing Sing, where the closest funeral home was, and the coroner concluded he died from mouth cancer, the result of tobacco use. Hundreds of people from miles around came to view his body at White and Dorsey's undertaking rooms. He was buried in Sparta Cemetery next to the Highland Turnpike, now called Route 9. You can hear it behind me. Over time, local historians decided on an identity for the Leatherman. In 1953, the Ossining Historical Society erected a bronze plaque that read Jules Bourglet from Lyon, Lyon being Lyon, France. So this identification was later discredited. So Scott's going to talk a little bit about how the Leatherman stone came, how his resting place came to be moved from over there, right by Route 9, to right there.
Yeah, so they find the Leatherman. He's buried in that portion of the cemetery. At the time, remember that's the back rear portion of the cemetery. It is probably what people call Potter's Field, which is that portion of the cemetery where the indigent are buried. There are Potter's Fields everywhere. It's actually a biblical reference to the field that they purchased with the 30 pieces of silver where the people who were visiting Jerusalem, who were travelers, were buried. But Potter's Field is traditionally where the indigent and the homeless are buried, and that was probably right down there in that section. In 2011, largely because of a book and an interest by a man named Frank DeLuca from Connecticut, they got the University of Connecticut involved, and they were going to exhume his body. They did a probe. They found what they thought was the nails from his original coffin. They set up a whole thing. They dug down, and quite frankly, they couldn't find him at all. But they took the land, the soil that was down there, they brought it up here, they placed it here on this rock, underneath this rock here. You see here, people come into the cemetery. I see a lot of French coins here. I see a lot of rosaries come here. This is not uncommon. You go just 3.5 miles down the road to Andrew Carnegie's grave. You see coins they put on his grave. There's the famous Poe toaster, the man who used to, for decades in Baltimore, he would go in on Edgar Allan Poe's birthday and have a cognac with Edgar Allan Poe. It was famous. The only reason I know about it is in early 2000s when the Giants were playing the Ravens in the Super Bowl. The Poe toaster went in there and he left like on like a Giants jersey or something, and people flipped. So that's the only reason I know about it. But visiting graves and leaving things for good luck or as a sign, a token of what people feel about things isn't uncommon, and it's pretty common here, and we see it all the time. Diana?
Yeah. Scott, Kimberly has a question. Whatever happened to his leather suit?
Dana?
Actually, it was exhibited in Coney Island at a kind of museum of its kind of a Ripley's Believe It or Not for the day. You know, they put things in. Unfortunately, the suit burned in the fire. But he pieced it together himself from various pieces of leather, including a little hat and his boots.
Okay. In conclusion, thanks for coming. We appreciate it. You know, as an environmental historian, I can tell you one of the things that environmental historians, or the quote they like to quote the most is, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeing new sights, but with looking with new eyes. It's Marcel Proust. What that means is, you don't have to travel, and in these times when it's so difficult to travel or unsafe or impossible, you can use these new eyes, this information, and derive some of the same benefits of travel by looking in your own community with new eyes. So please, in these difficult times, help us help you get some new eyes and see these things in our own community. I can't thank everybody enough here for coming today. It was fantastic. Please come in and check out our LibGuides on the digital library in the Ossining Public Library, and come in the library and say hello and check out our local history collection. Dana, you have any last thoughts?
Thank you everyone for coming. We hope to do more locations just like this, and make sure you check out our video. Thanks everybody. Happy Halloween.
And thank you, Louis. Thank you, Louis.